We tend to think of industrial agriculture as a miracle drug with, yes, some expected side effects. But in truth, industrial agriculture is no miracle. It's a dead end that we're fast reaching. It is rapidly degrading and destroying all we need to grow food. So organic farming, or what I'll call agroecology, which is a broader term for farming aligned with nature, is not only a viable farming solution, but it is essential to our survival. Now, my own big wake-up call came about 45 years ago when the experts were telling us and newspaper headlines were blasting out, we've run out of food to feed us. We've hit the limits. And so I sat in the UC Berkeley Agricultural Library and did some basic arithmetic. I was shocked to learn that, in fact, there is no scarcity. But more shocking still was that we are creating the experience of scarcity from plenty. So that was my beginning. And today for each of us, each person on earth, we produce 40% more food than then. It comes to about 2,900 calories a day for each of us, and that includes 60% more protein than authorities here in the U.S. recommend for an average adult. That's a lot. And yet the scarcity message continues. So let me start with the vast inefficiency built into what we call industrial agriculture. Worldwide, we devote about 3/4 of agricultural land to livestock. Yet livestock give us about 17% of all of the calories that we consume. Now, cattle do the best shrinking job here, shrinking our calorie supply. For of the 100 feed calories, every 100 feed calories that cattle consume, what do we get back in beef? We get about 3, so 3%, not a great return. Now, all in all, about half of the world's calories go to people directly. The rest go to livestock and increasingly to agrofuel and to other industrial purposes. So maybe the most shocking way of saying this is because of all this inefficiency, our system in the U.S. feeds fewer people per acre than does Indian or Chinese. Now, all this plenty that I've described, still today, about almost 800 million of us are deficient in calories, and 1 in 4 of us is deficient in a key nutrient that we need to be healthy. So, here we are. Reflecting global extreme inequality, industrial agriculture focuses on livestock, as we've just seen, and it is one measure of that inefficiency. Now, this dead end, consider what livestock also contributes. Livestock are a big negative for climate change. Producing a pound of lamb or beef means 20 to almost 50 times greater climate change impact than producing a pound of high-protein food, like beans, for example. And water? In our water-stretched world, destined to be much more so, note that producing 1 pound of beef uses about 50 times more than producing a pound of vegetables. Now, before turning to another viable path, a path that is viable and is emerging, let me set aside another myth. We often hear that the U.S. feeds a hungry world. That clouds our understanding of the crisis and how to solve it. For over half of our agricultural exports, or about half of them, go to China, Mexico, and Japan, whereas most of the hungry people in the world live in India and Africa. So note that it's not the U.S., but small farmers who supply in Asia and Africa, in Sub-Saharan and Africa, supply 80% of what is consumed. So let's just put that myth to rest before we go on. But now, is there a viable, healthy, climate-friendly path that is available that will produce all we need? And my answer is a resounding yes. Agroecology, that is farming aligned with nature without dependence on purchased inputs, is spreading across the world. Its growth, with so little public support compared to industrial agriculture, is itself evidence of how effective it is. In the decade before 2011, organically farmed land doubled. And in India, which was the takeoff point for chemical agriculture in the global south, it increased 8-fold over that period. Let me take you to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, covering a substantial area of southern India, for example. It was once known as an area of very high pesticide use. But now, as a result of many village movements and support from a state agency, the people of these states are moving very fast toward ecological farming. The state even pays small stipends to a network of thousands of village activists who are teaching their neighbors the basics of sustainable farming. So these approaches are now reaching about 2 million farmers, covering about 15% of the farmland in these new practices. And in just 4 years, the state of Andhra Pradesh cut its pesticide use in half. Very impressive. Kerala, a small state in southern India, in 2010 set a goal of moving up to organic 100% in just a decade. Another example I want to mention comes from Africa, and it is the practice of mixing trees and crops in the same land. It is growing throughout the world, but very dramatically. In Africa, in Niger, for example, farmers have transformed half of their farmland into agroforestry, that is mixing the trees and crops in the same fields and increasing yields and increasing the carbon storage capacity of the soil. At the same time, they've secured food for 2.5 million people there. So we see here that hunger is not the result of a scarcity of food or food-producing potential. It reflects a scarcity of democracy. By that I mean a lack of voice over one's own destiny. I mean that at its most basic meaning. And this is reflected in and a result of growing inequality throughout the world that is denying people power over their land and income to access food. In most parts of the world today, inequality is increasing. So we reach the almost unbelievable point that 1% of the world's population controls about half the world's wealth. Put another way, half the world is made to survive on basically 1% of the world's wealth. So wealth concentrates and kills democracy, understood as our right to have a voice in our future and certainly over our basic survival needs. And we see this as concentrated private wealth shapes electoral politics, and therefore public choices shift to favor the wealthiest. Let me mention just a couple of examples in resources here. Throughout the world, shifting to livestock-centric farming. The wealthiest can definitely afford more than the poor. Here at home, for example, we put about $17 billion into tax subsidies going to commodity crops, mainly feed crops, and just less than 1% of that is going to help farmers who are organic and moving toward organic farming. Another consequence of privately held government is monopoly power. That seed and fertilizer and pesticide industries are highly concentrated and becoming more so. So what is the consequence of that? Well, for one, seeds increase in price. Just take Monsanto alone. Its seeds have doubled. That is adjusted for inflation, doubled since the late 90s. So not surprisingly, given this concentration, about half of the world's calorie-deficient people themselves live in small-scale farming communities. And without democracy, people go hungry, no matter how much is grown. I want to close with pointing out that my examples from India and Africa and many other places throughout the world make clear that citizens worldwide are creating local democratic movements that are addressing the real scarcity, the scarcity of democracy, and aligning their farming with nature.